It's taken me almost 3 years, but he's finally here. This week, we welcome Jim Routh, former CISO at MassMutual, CVS Health, and Aetna, to discuss the 3 mistakes all first-time CISOs make that no one tells you. In the Leadership and Communications section, a Chief Executive Officer's Guide to Cybersecurity. Zoom settlement, an $85 million business case for security investment. CISOs, do you know what's in your company's products? And more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. Extra Hop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/extra hop. We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Weekly. This is episode number 227, recorded August 9th, 2021. I am your host, Matt Alderman, back in Colorado after a week in the heat. Yes, I was at Black Hat last week. Joining me remotely are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey, Matt, how you doing? Hope you had fun in the heat. It's rainy here, but I did Black Hat virtually this year.
Yeah, I know you were supposed to come out, and I was hoping we could meet, but, ended up virtually. I get it. And my second co-host, Mr. Adrian Sanabria. Welcome, Adrian.
Hey, welcome back, Matt. Bit jealous I didn't get to go out there, but eventually we'll get back to normal.
Yeah, thanks for holding down the fort last week, because I had some travel in there. I had to miss last week. I'm not
that's my pleasure.
Interview. I'm not missing this one, though. I'll get there in a second. First, Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score. Visit securityweekly.com/CIRB to take the survey. SC Media is debuting its all-new SC Digital experience, fully integrated with the Security Weekly podcast content and more. The new site increases the scope and scale of the original content, resources from editorial staff, contributors, and the far-reaching Cyber Risk Alliance network. Visit scmagazine.com to check out the new look. Jim Routh is currently on the boards of Supply Wisdom, Gramma Tech, Zero North, Accepto, and the Global Resiliency Federation. He is the former board chair for the Health Information Security and Analysis Center, HISAC, where he served for 5 years, and the former board member for the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, FSISAC. He is presented to board committees from many public and private companies, as the CISO or CSO, providing cybersecurity updates and education designed for board members over the past 20 years. Jim brings to the boards a vast business and technology background and is considered a digital and cybersecurity industry expert and thought leader. He has prepared and delivered several customized education sessions to the board members for the National Association of Corporate Directors based on leading cybersecurity practices. Jim, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Matt, great to be here. Glad you made it back from the desert, and happy to participate.
So a little background for this segment. When I joined Security Weekly back in 2018, one of the first interviews I reached out to try to schedule was with you, Jim. And I think this was right around the time the Aetna CVS healthcare merger was going down. And you're like, yeah, I'm a little busy, ping me back later. It took me a while, but I finally got you here. So thank you.
You're persistent.
I try. So as we were preparing for this segment, there was a couple angles that we could have gone. One is because you've been in the CISO role, we do talk about CISO transition, but you brought up, hey, I've got these 3 common mistakes that every first-time CISO makes, but nobody ever tells you what they are. So can we talk about that? And I said, absolutely, great content. So why don't you kick us off? Give us a little background.
Sure. Number one, when you first become a CISO, there isn't a manual, a book. There's nothing written down that you just figure, okay, well, now I'm a CISO and I'll just continue to do what I've kind of learned how to do. And it turns out that there are fundamentally different techniques that are necessary. And I'll give an example of the first one. It's a trap. And it's a trap that almost every first-time CISO falls into. And I'd really love it if the information that I share can be beneficial to others so that they don't have to make those mistakes. I made these mistakes. They were a bit painful, which turned out to be positive in the long run because they made me more resilient, I guess. But they were painful, and I ran headlong into them. The first is this. When you're dealing with your business stakeholders, typically the CEO and the CEO direct reports, they have an expectation of you as the CISO, and the expectation is that you will play the role of a subject matter expert. You will identify what the top risks are for the enterprise, and you'll prioritize the necessary investments and allocation of scarce resources to the highest risks over time based on your subject matter expertise, typically because the CEO and the direct reports of the CEO don't typically have a lot of confidence in their ability to understand the intricacies of cybersecurity and how criminal cyber practices evolve and change and trigger the need for different types of control. So they rely on the subject matter expert, and they expect you to play that role. Now, here's the downside if you walk in and meet those expectations right out of the gate. The downside is that you share the top risks with them. They acknowledge the top risks. You push for alignment and consensus around how to allocate resources to those top risks. And as soon as there's any bit of tension or strain on resource allocation decisions, it crumbles, it falls apart. And your stakeholders are not supporting the same priorities that were discussed previously. And so the expectation of you is to be a subject matter expert. However, the scar tissue I've learned is that you really have to manage expectations, not meet expectations for your key stakeholders. It's more important for you to drive consensus on what the top risks are for the enterprise in order for you to have downstream implications for adhering to the tough trade-off decisions that get made on allocating resources to the top risks. And that's resources across the entire enterprise. So without that consensus, the decision-making process will fall apart and end up not reflecting the top risks. And so the worst thing you can do is do what your stakeholders expect you to do. Act like that subject matter expert. The best thing you can do is to be a facilitator. And facilitators that drive to consensus have to convey neutrality. So you can't play the role of the subject matter expert. You actually have to play the role of the facilitator. And if you look at any techniques across the board for good meeting facilitation, you'll see that creating a sense of neutrality is absolutely essential for the facilitator. It's a little bit more difficult. It takes some different techniques. However, the outcome of consensus on the top risks will set you up for success in driving the tough decisions, trade-off decisions on how to allocate resources for those top risks. And this is something that nobody ever tells you when you become a CISO. But learning how to apply techniques for meeting facilitation to drive to consensus, paramount in driving long-term resilience across the enterprise.
Now, I know Jason wants to get in here, but I just want to I want to say something first. I mean, it's counterintuitive, right? It's very counterintuitive to be neutral when you have a lot of the experience, right? And so what you just said is a very counterintuitive point for a CISO is not to be the expert, be neutral and build consensus.
Yeah, it's actually much easier to follow the expectations and to be the SME. And it's why we all did it the first time and failed. And you don't recognize it. You actually feel pretty good because you're meeting expectations on the front end. On the back end, you're feeling really bad because you met expectations on the front end.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, Jim. Honestly, every time I would come into a leadership position as a CISO and start building the relationships across all the different business units, one of the things I would make sure that, we got out of the way right away is I bring a certain level of expertise to the table, but ultimately, your business unit, the risk appetite of your business unit, and that piece of the business better than anyone. So it's a shared responsibility across the organization to make these decisions, right? And that's how I always went at the relationship building side of the aisle with other business unit leaders. And it's absolutely correct because, as a CISO, it's not going to be a long-term benefit to go in there and just start making hammer down decisions, right? We have to make those decisions based on consensus across the business units. There've been many times where I've brought, 3 or 4 different business units in together. So we all had to make a decision together that's best for the organization. And yeah, I mean, we can't go in there with a bulldozer, right? We have to go in there and build those relationships. And kind of that what's in it for you is, I always said to my colleagues, you're going to learn from me and I'm going to learn from you because I'm going to learn the business now. I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of how you operate within your business unit.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I was going to say, also from within the security group, I think it's important to set expectations too. I remember moderating a talk a couple months back, and it was a CISO giving the talk, and one of the questions we got in the Q&A, was any advice for someone who's had, I forget what the number was. It was ridiculous. There was something like 8 CISOs in 5 years or something like that. And with each CISO comes, different person, different goals, and the team was just feeling like they had been just tugged in so many different directions over those years. And well, that's a problem in itself, but generally, I think it's a challenge, when you're at that level and it's up to you to, point the ship in a certain direction.
Yeah, I think what I've learned is that it's actually more important to get consensus on the top risks and ultimately the decisions that get made on how to invest resources and, allocate the budget downstream. That's more important than actually getting the risks right. So if you have to give up something as the SME, maybe risk number 1 is not your risk number 1, it's your risk number 1 is number 2, but it came out at number 1. That actually is less significant an issue than not having that consensus. But that's something you learn from experience.
Right. So, Jim, is guidance for an organization looking for a CISO to look for a facilitative CISO versus a subject matter expert CISO? I mean, is that how organizations should approach their CISO search because it will net a better result in that recruiting process?
Yeah, Matt, you actually hit on something that's fascinating, because I tell you, from my own personal experience, I estimate, and this is just a crude estimation, about 70% of the people that interview CISOs have no friggin' idea of what they're doing in major top tier enterprises. And I wish it were, I wish it were different, but in reality, most people really don't know what to look for. So your question is, is facilitation skill, is that paramount in having that as a skill set for the CISO? Now, based on what I originally said, I think, yes, it's paramount, it's principal, it's core, it should be part of every CISO comfort level in terms of a skill. But it's a bit difficult to measure during the interview process, and it's certainly not high on the list of questions that typically get asked in the interview process. So I think ideally, it actually should be something to look at. Now, some organizations will look at relationship building skills, and certainly facilitation skill is maybe part of that. And that's how it comes out in the interviews, or they'll look for culture fit and the ability to be collegial and working in a collaborative way, and they'll have certain questions to drive at that. And I think all of that is really positive, but at the end of the day, I actually think facilitation, the ability to facilitate, is a big step forward towards enterprise resilience. Because the reality is enterprise resilience isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous process. And it takes work, it takes effort, and it takes leadership skill committed to doing that. And that's what ultimately success is at the enterprise. I don't think enterprises should expect never have security incidents. There may be a time decades ago when that was pertinent, but it's certainly not today. Any major enterprise that has a digital presence is going to have major security incidents. And as a result, the resilient enterprise is the one that practice those incidents, apply a methodology and discipline around those incidents to harvest the lessons learned and improve their processes going forward. And having a lot of incidents actually can lend itself towards enterprise resilience to be able to withstand the incidents as they occur and minimize the business impact.
Yeah, and those risks are going to continue to change, which means the first facilitation is not the only one. It's an ongoing process, right? So you have to build consensus potentially continually as risks shift to the business. So having those facilitation skills to build consensus, I think, would be an important part towards resiliency, because you're making the appropriate adjustments based on where the business risks lie.
Matt, you nailed it. And that's really the second thing that nobody tells you, is that, like, even if you have some level of success on getting consensus on what the top risks are, and ultimately the decisions to allocate budget resources and scarce resource to the highest risk priorities, that's really the beginning. The next step of maturity is to be able to adjust those decisions based on changes to the risks triggered by threat actor tactics evolving and changing. And that's an ongoing process, takes a higher level of skill, again, going back to facilitation skill on a continuous basis. So Matt, you nailed it. That's exactly what a CISO has to do. And I don't know any formal structured education or training to help CISOs specifically with cybersecurity risks as they change and evolve. I do know that a commitment to facilitation skills will enable a CISO to be successful. But again, I don't know anybody telling CISOs to do that. So hopefully, Matt, your audience here can benefit from that downstream.
You said it first, Jim. I tossed it out there for you.
But so that the ability to facilitate those type of conversations, I think, has these unintended consequences that come out of it, which are good, right? It's building a level of trust, because once you're seen as a leader who can facilitate conversation, facilitate decision, and facilitate priorities for your organization, it starts to build trust, right? And we talked about this being a continual process, a continuous improvement process. And that trust, I found, in turn, gives me an ear to the ground for any net new risks that may be coming on board, where business unit leaders start saying, hey, wait a minute, we're taking on this new, whatever the case may be, new partnership, right? We're looking at a net new CRM system or ERP system. Let's make sure the security team is involved out of the gate. So I think by being that facilitator and by being seen as a leader like that, you build rapport, you build trust, and you start getting ingrained deeper into the business.
So a question for you, Jim. Inevitably, CISOs move on, and we hear about the length of time it takes to search for a new CISO and replace a CISO. In your opinion, what's the best way? You're putting all this work into, to get set these expectations, and get things pointed in the right direction, get everybody rowing in the right direction. What's the best way to ensure that it's not disrupted when a CISO does eventually move on? Like, should CISOs be looking to mentor somebody or prep somebody from within to take their place, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Adrian, the short answer is yes, but I'll give you the more content-realistic answer, I guess. What I did at MassMutual is the situation that I walked into at MassMutual was 5 CISOs in 6 years, I think. I was the 5th CISO in 6 years. And so a lot of change in leadership and all of the negative byproducts that go along with that, because frankly, transforming an organization into a highly resilient cybersecurity program, the best talent in the world can't do that. It takes about 18 to 24 months for something like that. So that kind of churn creates its own, sets of challenges in terms of leadership. So I think the answer to your question is that CISOs have to, and it's really part of their mission and mandate for talent development. They have to create a level of leadership within their organization that gives the organization multiple choices for successors. And so there are multiple people that need to identify themselves as potential CISO candidates, and your job as the interim or as the acting CISO at that point in time is to develop that talent to give the organization choice. So I had several people that reported to me who I hired specifically to be my successor. So the criteria of what I was looking for when I was hiring them was to be my successor. And so I tried to get as people that either had previous experience as a CISO or had a lot of really good leadership experience in cybersecurity, and then gave them some opportunity to develop the skills necessary and really the opportunity to practice the skills. So it turns out that stakeholder expectation management is, for a CISO, it's unique, it's different, and it's not something that you learn in textbooks. And so you have to give responsibility for relationship management for business stakeholders to some of your direct reports, either in a business information security officer role or really just a relationship management responsibility, to teach them or really to give them an opportunity to apply techniques to be successful in managing expectations as they change. Because it turns out that even if you learn techniques, you really have to apply the techniques and learn from the practical experience that comes from applying the techniques. And you need to give leaders an opportunity to do that. And fortunately, I had 2 diverse candidates that were ready now, essentially candidates. And the organization chose one of them to be my successor when I retired. And there was a very smooth transition. And it turns out that person also just went on maternity leave. And while she's out on maternity leave, the other direct report is the interim CISO and has previous experience as a CISO. So that transition, because of, triggered really by my retirement, was highly effective and so far has been very successful for MassMutual, simply because we had the bench strength, so to speak, of talent that was being developed for the CISO role. And that was a commitment made several years before.
And that ties into point number 2, which is hiring talent, the mistake that people make with hiring talent. You talk through aspects of that, but what is the mistake we make when hiring talent?
Yeah, so in cybersecurity, it's similar in other aspects. It's similar in some parts of IT. It's similar in data science. But there are certain market conditions, basically having to do with scarcity of resource. And so the mistake that most CISOs make is that they use conventional techniques for human resource management and expect to yield positive results in terms of talent acquisition and talent retention and development. And that doesn't work. The market conditions don't allow for that. So you have to fundamentally change both the paradigm, but also the processes used in terms of HR practices. So the first thing that I recommend is you build a very collegial and effective relationship with your HR partner. And the reason for that is simple. You're actually going to be breaking some rules. And I say that knowing that that presents potential conflict with HR, but that's what's necessary in terms of the marketplace. So I'll be very specific here in identifying the rules you have to break. Number 1, there is no such thing as talent retention. What do I mean by that? I mean, stop saying talent retention. And the reason for that is if you ever went up to an individual that reports to you and you ask them, do you want to be retained? The answer is kind of not very fulfilling. It's like, well, I hadn't thought about it being retained. Not really. If you just change that verb from retention to development, the world changes. So if you said to the individual, would you like to be developed? That sounds like there's more in it for me, and therefore, yes, I'd like to be developed. I'm not interested in being retained. I'm interested in being developed. And so the orientation for a cybersecurity leader has to be around development and a commitment to development. Now, that's a foundational item. The second thing that breaks with traditional or conventional HR practices is that there's a mindset that says you hire people when you need them. And therefore, when you need them, you create an opening, a job description, and you go through a posting process, all of which is very painful to do because there's all sorts of checks and balances in there for any large enterprise, just the nature of the beast. So what I'm suggesting is you don't do that. What I'm suggesting is you hire people when you find them. And in order to do that, you have to look for them every day. What does it mean? It means about 25% of your time should be looking for talent. So that means you should be doing exploratory interviews every day. And you should be attracting people to interview, not for a role or a position, but an opportunity to develop. And so in the interview process, you should be asking the candidate, what do they want to learn? And what they want to learn has to be the foundation for the role that you ultimately create for their benefit, as opposed to defining a role and then going out in the marketplace and saying, I'm going to hire this role. So I need a security architect, I'm going to look for a security architect. I wholly recommend you don't follow that model. You create a new model where you create evergreen postings that allow you to do continuous recruiting all the time. When you speak of sharing your practices with the industry to help the industry be more resilient, you're educating others on the opportunities for developing talent. and you'll attract talent to your organization by doing that. You should constantly commit to interviewing in exploratory reasons with no basis of any role, individual talent. And when you find talent, create a role that satisfies their need. Now, all of this is highly unconventional, and it requires you to have an HR partner that understands the marketplace conditions and the need to adjust and change practices. And the success that you have will outstrip any success you've had in the past for attracting talent. So I'm going to make this statement. I've made it several times before publicly. In 20 years of cybersecurity leadership, I never used a recruiting firm, and I never had any problem attracting top, world-class, diverse talent. And the reason, and there is only one reason, is I made a commitment to teaching people what they wanted to learn and giving them an opportunity to learn what it is they wanted to learn. And instead of just deciding what they were going to learn and, throwing curriculum at them, instead, I want them to decide what they want to learn, whatever makes them most marketable. And that's what I want to commit to. And I do that on a sustained basis. And I never have any trouble, even in a scarce marketplace that we're operating in today, never had any trouble getting talent. So it's a fundamentally different mindset. Once again, it's not something anybody prepares you for. But as a CISO, the facts are very simple. There's a scarce resource in the marketplace. There's scarcity of resources. And you have to do something different to attract and develop talent long term. This is what has worked successfully for me.
Jason, I'm pausing for you because I know you just are sitting there going, "Well, I wish I did that."
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's the goal, right? I mean, from my hiring practices, it's always finding the right attitude and the right aptitude that's going to fit our culture and our organization, and then grooming that talent accordingly based on the roadmap that we decide on together, right? And I mean, I've told you stories on the show plenty of times of folks who were business analysts who came over to the cybersecurity side, right? Who were third shift operations center folks who ended up swinging into the cybersecurity team. And really, Jim is dead on, right? It's find that talent and then bring them into your organization and guide them through, the end game for them, the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And you're going to have a great set of talent on your team. And I wholeheartedly agree with having that succession plan, right? I mean, Matt, I basically tell folks on my team, my job is to teach you how to put me out of business so I can go on to my next best thing, right? And grooming that talent so that way you have that succession plan, because it is very disruptive, right? It's very disruptive to teams if you're going in and out of leadership roles, every year, like you guys were mentioning. How do you have sustainability? How do you have direction? How do you have strategy when the leader is literally uprooting a plan every year, and then you get a new leader, right? And then it's a different set of outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And it's a huge difference in the feel working at a place. Like I know so many people that could never even imagine, openly talking about their next job with their boss or with their boss's boss, or even with their coworkers. They're afraid somebody's going to find out, and they're going to get in trouble because they're considering moving on in their career to another job, which seems kind of ridiculous. But it's not a comfortable conversation that can currently be had in a lot of places. And I think that's a really healthy shift, is this shift in perspective where, the employee's not, this isn't IBM and it's not the 60s. The employee's not coming here to spend their entire life and retire. It's just, we all know that. We know it doesn't work like that anymore, but we still that culture still kind of exists where you can't really talk about it openly.
Yeah, Adrian, you're absolutely right. A lot of the management processes were designed based on that, construct. And when I started in working for large corporations, I was told what I was going to learn. I was told when I was going to learn it. And I was given just-in-time education based on a model that I was following. It's a path I was following. Nobody ever asked me, what do you want to do? That wasn't part of the equation. And I think today, that is the equation. I think our job as leaders is actually to understand what people want to learn, give those opportunities to that person to excel in what they want to do, and frankly, get the hell out of the way. The more we can extract ourselves and just line up a person with what they want to learn with an opportunity to learn it, and then just be supportive of them through that learning process, that gets us out of the critical path, and that's going to greatly increase success across your entire organization. Because frankly, I don't really believe a leader can be a motivator. I believe a leader can be an enabler, and to enable whatever an individual motivation is with a potential outcome just by giving them an opportunity. And so if we can get out of the way, we can probably avoid a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, and that ties, you've already brought the third one in, which is around employee retention, i.e. employee development. You made an interesting statement to me when we were doing the prep call about, I have no budget constraints, but you put the onus back on the employee to actually build their kind of skills plan. So talk about that a little bit, because that ties into that kind of employee development piece.
Yeah, Matt, I'm glad you brought that up. If you're an HR practitioner and you work in a large organization, you basically have to recognize that there are limitations to what educational resources can be applied across a large enterprise, just because there's so many employees. Like if you're an enterprise with 100,000 employees and you basically say, okay, we're going to spend $20,000 a year on everyone, you all of a sudden multiply that by 100,000. You're like, oh, we can't afford that. So that's not going to work. So you get down to this number that's like $1,100, per person on average. And a lot of the HR practices are to offer learning vehicles that cost money to an exclusive set of individuals based on specific parameters. It looks like everybody has a shot, but really at the end of the day, it doesn't. So I come at from a very different perspective. Again, it's unconventional. It basically says this, and I've done this now, I think, across 3 organizations, 3 different enterprises, certainly in the last, 7 or 8 years. I basically tell the organization there are no budget constraints for education and training. And I tell them that regardless of what the financial conditions are, that particular year or that, impact for the company. But the governor I put in place is I say you have to have a professional development plan that's agreed upon by your leader, and whatever is in your development plan from an educational standpoint, from a travel perspective, that's what will be supported. So we will never allocate, a fixed amount of money to each individual employee. Every employee will get an opportunity to experience educational development based on what their needs are, not based on what a budget is. Now, with the net result of that, if you apply the discipline of funneling things through the professional development plan, that basically is the employee declaring what they want to learn and what development activities the organization or enterprise is willing to support to allow them to learn what it is that they want to learn. That's essentially the professional development plan. Now, if you use that as the governor, it turns out that you'll never exceed your budget. It turns out that the proactive, highly committed to development employees get exactly what they want. And the employees that are less active, less committed, and less proactive won't get those opportunities. And they'll self-select themselves into fewer opportunities from a development or educational standpoint. and you'll never go over a budget. I mean, I never went over budget for training education in any of the years that I did this. And I made it quite clear to the every person in the organization that there was no budget. And so you can actually have your cake and eat it too, at least from my experience. But it all, as Matt suggested, it comes down to enforcement of the commitment of the individual in the development plan to those learning opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's just a great way to, if you want to do it, you're going to do it. And if you're not interested, then you're not going to do it. And then there's no issue with training budgets anymore. Again, that third kind of piece around employee development. Jim, we could go on for hours because it's been a long time since we caught up. But I do want to thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly today.
It's my pleasure. Happy to do it.
We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.
Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSync Continuous Control Automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/cybersync. Cybercriminals are using social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Adrian Sanabria. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person, yes, in person, this December 5th through 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We are excited to announce our first round of speakers: David Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Ciavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Kevin Johnson, and Justin Kohler. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out our rockstar lineup. Also, join us August 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern to learn how to implement cloud security that actually works. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, gentlemen. Before we get into articles, I wanted to give you a quick, just a quick synopsis on Black Hat. It was an interesting week last week. There was a lot of debate about a hybrid event and how it was going to go, and my concern kind of validated a little bit with the last minute changes by the CDC is that when you have a physical and a virtual event, what's the incentive to be physical outside of wanting to be there in person? It was great to see friends. It was great to see everybody, but it was definitely smaller. Like I said, the business hall is probably about the quarter of the size it was in 2019. Some great meetings, some great content, great to catch up with people, but definitely an impact. So it was an interesting couple days in Vegas.
Yeah. I was one of those who shifted their in person over to virtual. I mean, it just made sense with everything that was going on to make that flip.
Yep. Well, the Security Weekly crew did everything remotely from studio, so that was great. We could still do what we normally do. We just did it in a remote virtual setting, which was fine.
And while you're away, Matt, I actually got a new nickname from our viewers. I don't know if you know that, but I'm now the full package risk juggler. So, shout out to Schmooze.
That was awesome. Yeah, and it's I mean, I think sounds, Matt, like it was fine. It is kind of your review of Black Hat. Like it was smaller, but like baby steps, right? Like this is our first physical conference, first big name physical conference since everything locked down, right?
Yeah, I mean 17 months. Well, almost 17 months, right? RSA was end of February, March timeframe was, so it's been about 17 months since we got back together. So, I mean, what I heard from sponsors was great conversations. Quality of those conversations were great. It just the quantity was down a little bit, but they still seemed to be pretty happy, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's dig into these articles. CEO's Guide to Cybersecurity. We talked a little. Some of these articles are going to relate to the previous segment we just had with Jim, right? Because Jim is what I would call one of like the premier leaders in cybersecurity. I mean, without a doubt, his history, the things that Jim has done in the past, and when you look at kind of what he just walked us through, you could see the vision of how he's really led executive teams, boards, et cetera, through cybersecurity. This is a slightly different angle, but I think very related in how a CEO should approach it, because we talked like understand your threats, understand your risks, understand how to prioritize what's important to the business. I mean, this article just pulls it all together.
Yeah, it definitely does, right? And one of the pieces of this article that I liked as well is that it highlighted the fact that there was a lot of disruption happening with pandemic era digital transformation, because it was a necessity to continue to do business. And being able to take a look back at it now and say, hey, wait a minute, I know we kind of had to knee jerk to keep the business running, but let's make sure that we're focusing our security folks on, making sure that we did it in a secure fashion. And if not, let's fix it. Let's find those risks and remediate those risks. So that's a key point, because I'm working with a lot of customers now that they're at that point where they're realizing, hey, wait a minute, I got to circle back and check on this stuff and make sure we implemented and rolled out in the most secure fashion possible.
Yeah, and I think that Oh, sorry, Adrian. I was just going to say that facilitation conversation we had with Jim was like, as risks shift, you have to go rebuild consensus, right? And here's a perfect article talking about you got to go look back, fix some stuff, because there may be a new consensus of risk now.
Yeah,
and I think,
go ahead, Adrian.
I think it really depends on, what are you CEO of? The kind of company, is kind of going to determine what you should know about security and how deep you should be able to go into that. The CISO over at Zoom, that topic probably comes up in their conversations a lot more than, the average CEO, I would say.
Right. Probably. Yeah, let's get to that story because it's interesting. So this article says Zoom settlement, an $85 million business case for security investment. So $85 million is the class action lawsuit that Zoom is going to pay. But my question to both of you is, does that really justify the business case for security investment? Because I just looked up Zoom, and their revenue over the trailing 12 months is about $3.2 billion.
Right.
Does this really matter to them?
No, I don't think it makes a big impact to them. I think, if anything, what it's doing is setting a precedent for the future. So, I mean, organizations still need to keep an eye out for that, because this is setting a precedent. Now, while it's not going to hit them in the wallet hard, it's a decision that's on the books now. So it's precedent in law.
Yeah, I mean, to frame this, I use Dropbox. I store a lot of stuff in Dropbox. I don't know how many breaches they've had, but it's more than 3, and I think it's less than 7. Speed bumps on the way. This is a speed bump. It's, I was looking at their, the number I found when I just quickly Googled was 2.7 billion. And even at that, 85 million is 3%. So it's a speed bump.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's almost inevitable.
Right. And so if you're saying that you have to spend 2.5 to 3% of your revenue on security, think about that for a smaller organization. That still may not be enough. So I'm not sure I agree with this headline, which is why I brought it in, because I think every organization has to make a decision on what are the risks associated with my cybersecurity program and how much do I want to spend. And I can't use a number like this $85 million class action lawsuit to a $3.2 billion company to set the precedent.
No, in no way. I mean, this can't be used as an example for security investment.
Yeah, no, it's not like this settlement happens and then they're like, oh, we should spend on security. They've been doing that the whole time. I mean, you just can't have the massive, insane, unexpected growth that they had and not have speed bumps. Mm-hmm. Like I don't think anybody else, could have gone through what Zoom went through during the pandemic, and not end up with security issues, with surprises, and yes, some class actions are going to come out of that.
Yep.
Agreed. Yeah. This next article, though, was a little interesting, and this is Amazon's GDPR fine. And the fine is not related to a data breach. So think about this for a second, right? GDPR, privacy in Europe, protect the consumer data. And if you get breached, you're going to get fined. This isn't a breach fine. This is we don't like your process fine, which is a very interesting risk component that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about. Well, like, is my consent process in line with GDPR? Could I also receive some like weird fine because they don't like my process now? Right.
Yeah. And I mean, for breach, that's a lag measure, right? It's after the fact. It's after something bad has happened. This is more of a lead measure now that they're finding on, which is we don't like what you've set up for your process, which could lead to a bad situation. So we're going to hit you with a fine because of that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, part of
$87 million fine.
Yeah. And so again, I mean, running the numbers, that's not even 1%. That's not even half of 1%. That is a fifth of 1% of their revenue. But this is what GDPR was designed for. Like part of what it was designed for was, hey, no more hiding stuff in 300 pages of legal agreements and legalese and stuff like that. Like certain things that affect people's privacy has to be made obvious. So a lot of people are celebrating this as, GDPR actually having teeth, but clearly Amazon's going to fight it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I guess, and I'd be interested to hear, your thoughts on it. Is the success, obviously the success isn't the fine, right? The success is the sunlight that's been shown on this issue, right? And getting it out there and getting the conversation started. I think that's where people are celebrating the success, is that now there's a light shining on this and people are going to be talking about it.
Agreed. And that kind of ties into this next article around, hey, CISOs, do you know what's actually in your products? Because if you think about both of those examples for a second, Zoom being a product, having some challenges and some speed bumps, as Adrian refers to it. You have Amazon in the way that they process consumer data, which is kind of part of their platform and how they process data. This article says you guys might want to kind of like look under the covers and do some product reviews and check some stuff out in your own software to make sure you're not susceptible to some of this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it makes the case for the security team to be involved in your product development processes, right from the get-go, right from design, right? And having them involved right out of the gate, so that way it's not an afterthought and bolted on later, which we know is always a dangerous thing.
Yeah, and as more and more stuff comes down around software bill of materials and the supply chain and some of the areas there, look, CISOs are going to have to focus more on aspects of this to make sure that they're complying, especially if they're doing business with the federal government. I mean, we'll see how it goes into the broader ecosystem, but I mean, if you're doing anything with the federal government, these are going to be big areas for you to have to get your arms around as a CISO.
Oh yeah, it's inevitable, right? With CMMC and the software bill of materials coming down, it's inevitable. We have to, I would say prep for it because it's coming.
Well, it's not just for breaches and liability that you need to know, how your stuff works, but for business continuity also. Like we saw companies get taken down due to the Kaseya ransomware, not because they use Kaseya, but because one of their suppliers used Kaseya. So it was a completely invisible fourth party, a third party of a third party.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really, really challenging. This is one of those issues, like, it's kind of like looking at like one of those animations that zooms in on a fractal infinite for like forever. Uh-huh. Like every time I think about it, I'm like, man, like how do you even, I guess some of this stuff you just prepare the best you can and know about what you can know about. Yeah. Get that visibility.
This is why I go back to my third-party risk days, because if I think about this for a second, right? It's not just your immediate third parties, it's the third parties of your third parties and so on and so forth. And when we think about risk in a holistic way, how can I manage my risk if I don't understand all my fourth, fifth, sixth party risk criteria? Because I'll tell you where the concentration is. AWS, Azure, Google. Because if you think about how many services are moving to cloud, and you think about how many cloud outsourcing services are part of cloud outsourcing services, that would give you a purview. But if you're not looking at this, and if you're not managing these supply chains and all those relationships, you'd never know what that fractal looked like and when it got really, really big and scary and you said, oh, I should do something about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's one of those scenarios where it's a monolithic task, especially when you start getting to the fourth party, fifth party. But we have to start doing something, right? We have to show a level of diligence and just chip away. Like Adrian said, we got to be chipping away at this.
Yeah, for sure. This next article relates directly to the conversation we just had with Jim Routh. Organizations still struggle to hire and retain InfoSec employees. The two lessons he talked about today was hiring and retention, but it's not called retention, it's called development, folks. And, obviously the survey comes out of Black Hat last week. But I think what Jim just walked us through is just a different way of thinking about how to recruit and develop, i.e. retain your talent.
Yeah, 100%. And, we've been talking about this on this show for a long, long time, that we need to change the way we're hiring. We need to change the way we're managing our teams and bringing in talent because what we're doing right now isn't working. So I love his philosophy. Honestly, I really, really do. Bring the talent in because they're going to be a positive impact on your team, and then proactively develop that professional development roadmap with them, right? And honestly, that's how you build that relationship. That's how you keep that long relationship and journey going. And ultimately, as you start identifying leadership talent, you groom them to become the next leaders, right? You have to. And that's how you get sticky with your personnel and your staff, because you're invested. There's skin in the game on both sides. And when there's skin in the game on both sides, you have each other's back.
Yeah, and I think that really, Jason, you're kind of touching on the key thing here. Like, it's more than just how you hire, good people and how you treat them. But, it's a completely different relationship. It's still normal place today, to, maybe you really like your boss. Maybe you guys are friends and you do stuff together outside work. It's honestly today for most people a concern to leave your job because it's going to destroy, like you just know it's going to destroy that friendship. They might get mad at you. You never talk again because that's just the expectations that are set right now. Because you're not allowed to talk about it, it's going to catch them unprepared. You're going to put in a 2-week notice, and that's just not enough notice for that, CISO, that manager to find somebody else to replace you. I mean, it's almost impossible in this market, to replace, even like not even senior, even below senior level in InfoSec these days.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking, I've seen 8-month hiring windows, 10-month, 12-month. It's absolutely insane. The rigmarole you have to go through to hire talent these days. Where if we just start doing some of the things that Jim recommended, I think we'd have an easier time. But from that relationship with your employees, I think it's important because here's the thing. I would rather have that open dialogue and open relationship with an employee where they can come to me and say, listen, I feel like I'm starting to outgrow my role. I feel like I'm starting to outgrow, my responsibilities. And I think I'm ready to start looking for my next best thing. What that does for me is that gives me the opportunity to say, wait a minute, maybe your next best thing is here. Let's talk about this for a minute before you go looking. And it allows you to be proactive in that conversation because, the other side of that coin is, hey, I'm out of here in 2 weeks. See you later. And there was no dialogue ahead of time. It was completely surprise. And that's not what you want to have happen, right? You want to be able to help work with the employee for that long-term journey, that long-term relationship that you're going to have. I would much rather have that first conversation than the second.
Yeah. Jim said a couple of very interesting things on that last segment. He said, hire talent when you find it, not when you need it. To your point, 8 to 12 months to find it when you open a rec for it. Continuously be looking for it. Constantly recruit. Right. I mean, I do this with my network all the time, right? I will always help somebody find a job if they need a job. And I'm always looking for talent that potentially fits into where we are today as a company, right? So, leveraging that network and constantly recruiting, I think, is an important piece. The second thing is around development, right? If you have a very open employee development program where they can get the skills they want, they can put together a business development plan, and they're going to get it funded, that is a door opener to understand what do your employees, what do they want to do next, right? And that allows you, I think, Jason, to have that conversation on a more proactive basis with your employees to say, oh, you want to move into one of these positions? If we don't, maybe that's something we can move you up to. That creates that dialogue that's missing instead of the like, hey, I'm out of here. 2 weeks later, I'm gone.
Yep, 100%.
And the worst thing of all is not only are they leaving with 2 weeks notice, but in most cases, there's not even an exit interview. So the organization doesn't even know why they left in a lot of cases.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point, Adrian. I mean, honestly, it's, that's that feedback loop, if it doesn't happen, doesn't allow you to shift and change your ways. So that's a great point. I can't stress it enough, right? As leaders, as hiring managers, it's in our best interest to really be on top of it and have that pulse of the employee's professional roadmap. It's not just a once a year conversation either. As you set your goals, it's quarterly check-ins. How are we doing to those goals? Are we achieving those goals? Have we made it to the point where you're going to be successful with these goals that you've laid out? Because you want to know what? We're humans. We all get caught in the whirlwind. We're all running 1,000 miles an hour. And that conversation you had, 6-7 months ago may have got caught up in the day-to-day, caught up in the whirlwind. It's our jobs as leaders to remind folks, hey, wait a minute. Remember we had a plan here? Let's make sure that you're up to speed with it.
And that kind of ties in a little bit to this last article, which is, how do you improve cybersecurity as a team? Creating that collaboration and rallying around, some of those areas. Now, this is talking more about best practices and using things like the CIS benchmarks, et cetera. But again, back to collaboration, right? The ability to effectively facilitate, collaborate, build consensus, a key theme of what we just talked about with Jim earlier.
100%. It's an absolute necessity, right? You have to be collaborating with the rest of the business because you're one perspective in a very large business, right? And there's other business units, there's other motivations, there's other strategies going on in the business, and you have to bring all of that together to be able to build the plan, to build the right plan for the organization. I say it all the time, my services leader and my CFO aren't always, guided by the same North Star. They're looking at different aspects of the business and they're driving down their highway to success. And sometimes you have to bring them together and make a decision together, right? And you have to become that facilitator. And it's a skill set that at that level of a leadership level is 100% necessary.
Yeah, and doing it across the team. I mean, he talked about this, right? Mm-hmm. Building the relationships with the business units and collaborating with those stakeholders, having them help set the agenda for where their risks are. Yeah. He said, you may not get it exactly right, but that's not the most important part. It's that you build a consensus and you can deliver on the expectations then. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting back going, wait a minute, I thought we all agreed to fund this, and then now there's no budget to do it. He said that getting consensus on the budget and what you spend the money on is way more important than getting the risks in the exact right order.
And I would argue that getting that consensus is exactly right. It's exactly right for the entirety of the business. It may not be exactly right for a cybersecurity professional leader or cybersecurity team, but we're only one piece of the puzzle. We have the rest of the business that we have to align. So, I think if as a cybersecurity leader, you go in with a bulldozer and you don't build consensus and you come down with the arm of the heavy arm and say, this is what we're doing and how we're doing it, it's gonna undermine the relationship. And ultimately, when that relationship's not a strong one, you're going to have business unit leaders going to the CEO saying, we're not doing this, right? And it'll completely undermine any strategy you have.
Yeah, I mean, I keep using these boat analogies and rowing analogies, but I think it works here. If everybody's rowing in the same direction, if it's the wrong direction, you can just change direction. But if everybody's rowing in a different direction, you just go nowhere, regardless of what you do.
Yeah, true. And the other thing I thought he was interesting, the Mass Mutual story about, how he recruited and hired the talent, and kind of put them in different roles. One was more of a BSO, one was, doing other pieces so that you could continue that business collaboration. It also set you up for who potentially would fill that role if the CISO ever left. Now, in his case, he knew he was going to retire, but think about that as an organization, tie these all back into the conversation around these articles is recruit, retain, collaborate, build consensus. That puts you in a much better position as an organization when you do have a change in leadership. That will go a long, long way.
Yep. Like Jim said, it builds resilience, and that's the key.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.